Good morning again, Year 8s. Thank you for engaging with our online lessons. If you could please submit that message on Show My Homework to tell me that you're accessing the lesson and I can put you on the register, that'd be fantastic. Today's lesson is going to be self-marked, and there's also a My Maths activity because the activities during the lesson are quite short. So you should have plenty of time to get the My Maths done as well. And it's an adding and subtracting fractions, which is also our learning objective for today. Again, if you need any help during today's lesson, please get in touch with me at red@theroyal.school, and then if you can save Show My Homework for just submission of work, that would be absolutely fantastic of you. So today's lesson objectives: developing students are going to be able to identify equivalent fractions. We'll run through that in our starter. Secure students are going to be able to add and subtract fractions with common denominators. If you're unsure on any of those terms, we'll cover them during the lesson. And then excelling students will be able to add and subtract fractions with different denominators. So without further ado, we'll move to our starter activity. So I'd like you to try and copy and complete these pairs of equivalent fractions. So there's 4 pairs of equivalent fractions here. Each one has one single missing number in that you need to work out. So if you could pause the video until you've had a good go at those, and then unpause when you're ready for the answers. So answers to these, remember, when you're dealing with equivalent fractions, you need to work out what the top numbers have been multiplied by, and then the bottom numbers will have been multiplied by the same, or vice versa, or even divisions. So work out what the top numbers have been divided by, and then the bottom numbers will be divided by the same, again, or vice versa. So here we've got 2 top numbers for these fractions. In the first one, so we can have a look, well, a 1 has been turned into a 4. It's always multiplication and division with equivalent fractions, never adding and subtracting. So we need to say 1 has been times by 4 to get to 4. Therefore 2 has also been times by 4. It's got to have been times by the same number. And then 2 times 4 is going to give us 8. Same with the next one then. So we've got 4, the bottom number we're given here, so 4 has been times by 5 to get us 20, and then we need to do the same to the top number, so it's 3 times 5 to get us 15. Bottom left then, we've got the top numbers again, so we've got 2 has been turned into 6, so 2 times 3 is 6, so if we've multiplied the top number by 3, then we've also times the bottom number by 3. Oh, but hang on, we've actually missing the first number here. So something times by 3 is 9. Remember, if we've got the answer to this, we need to work in reverse. So we'd now be looking at something divided by 3, or 9 divided by 3 is going to tell us, excuse my mouse handwriting there, is going to tell us that our answer there is 3. 3 times 3 is 9, or 9 divided by 3 is 3. Last one then, if you have a look at our bottom numbers, we've got a 5 turning into a 35. So there we've multiplied by 7. So we also need to times our top number here by 7. And there we go, 7 as the top number. That's our equivalent fractions. So always timesing and dividing by the same numbers. It will be really useful to be confident with this because we're going to be using this later on in the lesson. Now, to start off, we're going to have a look at our second part of the learning objective for secure students, to be able to add and subtract fractions with common denominators. The denominator of a fraction means the bottom number, and the bottom number tells us how many pieces something has been cut into. The top number is the numerator, and then that tells us how many of those pieces we have. So we can see from these fractions here, we've got some visual representations up above, which is lovely, but here we've got 3/8 as our first fraction. The 3 part tells us that we've got 3 of them, and we can see that we've got 1, 2, 3, and then the 8 part means that we have a whole piece that's been cut into 8, so we'd actually need another, we've got 3 yellow ones here, but we'd need 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces altogether in order to make a whole one. So it's just telling us how big the pieces are. They are eighths, and then the top number tells us how many we've got. So the next fraction, we've got 2/8, and again we can see that we've got a 2 at the top, so we've got 2 pieces, and then because they're eighths, they're all the same size. Now the key here is that both bottom numbers are 8. This means we've got what we call common denominators. They're both 8, and this means it's really easy that when we're adding them together, we can just plonk our pieces next to each other in the visual representation, and we can see that we've got 5 pieces all together, and they are all eighths, therefore our answer is still in eighths. So 5/8 is our answer. It's a huge common mistake for people to think, oh yeah, adding fractions is easy. And they go 3 plus 2 equals 5. And they go, well, 8 plus 8 is 16. And they get this as an answer. You can tell those people haven't been listening. This is an incredibly wrong answer, but it's really common mistake that people make. So don't fall into that trap. So subtracting fractions is just the same idea here. So here I've got 3/6 as our first fraction, and I'm going to take away 1/6 from it. You can see here we have this common denominator. They're both in sixths, and this does make it really easy. If I've got 3/6, I can just take away 1/6 from it because they're all sixths. And you can see here that we're left with 2/6. And again, the denominator, that bottom number, doesn't change because the size of those pieces hasn't changed. It's just how many we're talking about that has changed. We started off with 3, took away 1, so we've got 2, but they are all sixths all the way through the problem. So our answer is still 2/6. Now, if you can simplify your answer, do so. There'll always be a little hint in some exam questions on these, because if you can see how many marks are available, it might give you a hint as to whether the fraction can be simplified. Much like our equivalent fractions is at the start, but we need to work out what can we divide these numbers by. Well, 2 and 6 are both in the 2 times table, so if we divide both of those numbers by 2, we get 1/3. We can't simplify this any further here, but it's always worth checking. So 1/3 is our final answer to this problem. So I've got a selection of questions for you to try here. So I've got some red questions which have some visual representations to help you out. So you just need to fill in the fractions that are represented there. I've got some orange questions with some more straightforward additions or subtractions. And then I've got some mixed questions in green that are going to be the harder ones now, which have some more difficult additions or subtractions, or if you can see in this question 14 here, we've actually got a missing number as part of the question, so you've got a particular answer to get to, so a bit more problem solving style here. So if you'd like to, please pause the video until you're ready for some answers on these, and unpause when you're ready to continue. So answers as on the board. If you can self-mark for those, that would be fantastic. I'm now going to move on to our more difficult activity, excelling students learning objective for this lesson. So you can see our excelling students here, which is what we hope and all we're going to be aspiring to at some point, is going to be able to add and subtract fractions with different denominators. This causes quite a few problems. It's quite a technical problem to get through. Most people should have seen this before, but it's well worth a reminder. So what we're saying here is we've got a problem because our two fractions have different bottom numbers. We've got 2/5 here plus 1/4. And when your fractions have different denominators, they cannot immediately be added together. Fifths and quarters can't mix because they're different types of number. So here we have different denominators. So our first step is to work out, well, if we've looked at equivalent fractions, what could we turn these fractions into? And what would be a common denominator or the same bottom number that we could use for them? So we need to have a look at the bottom number here, which is 5, and the bottom number here, which is 4. And we need to find a common multiple of them. So what we're going to need to do, and you might want to write these out on the side, is to work out, well, what is a common multiple of 5 and 4? And it's really useful if you can pick the lowest one, but if you don't pick exactly the lowest, it doesn't make the problem a disaster. It just means that you have to simplify your answer a little bit more. So fifths and quarters, so let's have a look at the 5 times table. We've got 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and so on. And then the 4 times table, we've got 4, 8, again, excuse my mouse handwriting please, 12, 16, 20, 24, and so on. And what we can see here is when we've gone far enough, we'll be able to see that we've got actually 20 is in both lists. 20 is in the 5 times table and it's in the 4 times table. So that's going to be a fantastic common denominator to use. So that's the one we go for. So 20 is the lowest common multiple of 5 and 4. But that's only our first step in this problem, finding the lowest common multiple. So we now need to say we're going to turn both of these fractions into 20ths. And this is very much like our starter activity now, because we need to work out, well, what happens to our original fractions in order to turn them into 20ths. So what we can see here is, in our first fraction, that bottom number of 5 has turned into a new bottom number of 20. So what have we times by? Well, 5, 10, 15, 20, we've times by 4. And that means that we now need to times our top number by 4 to get that equivalent fraction. So the top number times by 4 gives us 8. And we do the same with our other fraction. So we can see that our second fraction, the bottom number of 4, has been times by something to get to 20. If you count through the times table, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, it's been times by 5. So we also do that to the top number. 1 times 5 is going to give us 5. Now we've got an addition sum that we can actually do. 8 20ths plus 5 20ths, we have that common denominator, we have the same bottom number here, so now we can actually add these fractions together. And 8 20ths plus 5 20ths, this is now the simple part, is going to have an answer of 13 20ths. Remember that bottom number now is the same on both fractions, so it remains the same in our answer because we're adding pieces of the same size. 13 over 20 can't be simplified any further because 13 is a prime number, it's not in any of the times tables, so we can't simplify this fraction. So let's have a look at a subtraction here. Now, if you're feeling confident, you might want to work ahead with these problems and see if you got the right answer in just a moment. We've got 2/3 minus 3/8. So let's have a look. We can't add them together. Thirds and eighths, different denominators, so we need to find that common denominator. So what is in the 3 times table and the 8 times table? And that's going to be 24. So we're going to turn both of our fractions into 24ths. As I said, if you picked something like 48 here, which is another common multiple, you're just going to have to simplify your answer a little bit more at the end and you'll still be able to get it done. Just be careful that your lowest common multiple isn't always timesing those numbers together. You might see that on a few other help websites. It'll say, oh, just times those bottom numbers together to get the bottom number that's the common multiple. If we had something like fifths and tenths, then you'd only need to actually change one. 10's in the 5 times table, so you could use 10 as the bottom number. But back to this problem, we've got 24 as our lowest common multiple. So let's write both fractions with a 24 at the bottom. So first fraction, a bottom number of a 3 has turned into a bottom number of a 24. So what do we multiply 3 by to get 24? So that's going to give us 8. Now if our bottom numbers have been times by 8, then our top numbers need to be times by 8 as well. So we need to do a 2 times 8, and we get 16 as our top number, our numerator. And then we do the same to the second fraction. So our bottom number of an 8 has turned into a bottom number of a 24. What have we times by? Well, that's going to be 3. So now we have a look. Top number was 3 to begin with, so 3 times 3 is going to give us a new top number of 9. And now we get to the easy part because both of our fractions now have their common denominator of 24. So we can just do 16 minus 9, and because both of our fractions are out of 24, our answer will be out of 24 as well. So 16 minus 9 is going to give us 7, and because both of those fractions were 24ths, so is our answer. It's always worth checking to see if you can simplify this answer again. This one can't be done, but you'll find some in the questions that you've got can be. Remember, 7 is a prime number again. The 7's not going to be in any of the times tables, and also 24 isn't in the 7 times table, so we can't simplify this one. But if you can find a common times table that those numbers are in, divide by that and you'll simplify your answer. Always check if you can do that. So decide how confident you feel with adding and subtracting fractions, and again we've got red, amber and green activities for you to now have a go at. Remember, red is the one that has lots of support if you're not feeling very confident with this, and do have a look at the help that it does give you. Amber has a few little hints for those questions just to get you started, and then green has no support if you're feeling really confident with these. So if you'd like to pause the video until you've had a go at the attached activity, either red or amber or green, just one of the three, and then we can go through some answers when you unpause. So answers to those questions are as follows. So remember to try and simplify down as much as possible. If you haven't got fractions with these same bottom numbers, it might be a fact that you haven't simplified your answers fully. So do get in touch with me if you do need a hand at that at red@theroyal.school for email. Now, I'm hoping you haven't spent a huge amount of time on those questions, that you've got plenty of time to continue with the My Maths activity on this one. So thank you for engaging with this online lesson. This is the end of the slides. So please let me have a message on Show My Homework if you haven't already sent one, so I can mark you down the register. And then you can move on to the My Maths activity now, please. And it's adding and subtracting fractions. It should be set for you, but a couple of people have had some problems with their homework feed, so you can search that highlighted name, adding, subtracting fractions. For some reason, My Maths hasn't put adding and subtracting fractions, just adding, subtracting fractions. And you can work through that activity if it's not shown on your homework feed. So thank you very much. I'll speak to you later in the week. Have a wonderful day.